Often when language learning plans fail, people start blaming themselves, being hard on themselves, when what if there's actually nothing wrong with you? What if you deserve flexibility and kindness and an approach that reflects that? Maybe you're someone who has aspired to learn a language for years and has gotten stuck in a cycle of starting, quitting, restarting again. Maybe you've managed to work in earnest for some short and intense sprints, but then once you fall off the horse, it becomes harder and harder to get back on the horse as your break gets longer. Maybe all or nothing thinking and perfectionism paralyzes you from starting entirely. If this sounds like you, this video is about foundational mindset shifts and actionable tips to break you out of the quitting and restarting cycle for real this time. I'm Julianne of Leafling Learns, and I have started and quit and restarted Japanese over the course of 10 years. And when I was doing that, I was getting nowhere. Maybe you can relate, but it feels really bad when there's a goal that you really want to achieve and you feel like you keep failing at it over and over again. But for the past 2 years, I haven't quit. I've been consistently learning Japanese, no quitting, no restarting, no breaks that end up turning into months-long breaks. And for the first time in my learning journey, I'm seeing substantial progress that my prior attempts can't even compare to. I personally struggle with all or nothing thinking, perfectionism, negative self-talk, and if you can relate to me at all, and if you want to break out of the same cycle that I felt so bad in for so long, I want to share the things that I did to finally make a real change. Honor your humanity. In hundreds upon hundreds of hours that I spent searching, looking for the best and the most efficient way to learn a language, I failed to recognize something that all of these different systems and techniques lacked. Each of them were missing space for me as an individual and as a human. These systems had nothing to do with me at all. The underlying expectation or implication of most of these systems is that language learning exists in a vacuum and that they can just be tacked on to any person's life. But the reality is that there is no one size fits all, and language learning certainly does not exist in a vacuum. Everyone's free time, life circumstances, financial circumstances, interests, abilities, preferences, they all look completely different. What works for one person is not going to work for another, and the timeline is going to look completely different as well. I don't mean to be spicy, but fuck anybody who says that they know what's best for all people. If you allow in this mindset that there is one best way and that anybody should be able to do it, inevitably when you cannot do it for whatever reason, you're going to blame yourself and it's going to feel really shitty. It's going to feel like there's something wrong with you for not being able to do the thing. And that's not very motivating, is it? What we have to allow ourselves to do is release this rigidity, take things from different systems that work for us, and leave the rest. We have to create our own system that honors our individual humanity. What do I mean when I say honoring your humanity? I mean, if you're applying a system to yourself that doesn't respect your individual needs and doesn't take into consideration the fact that you're a human who deserves freedom and rest, that system is not honoring your humanity. Within the topic of honoring our humanity, we have to address underlying negative self-talk influenced by shame. Negative self-talk in language learning comes in a lot of different forms. There's unhelpful comparison to others. There are expectations of where you think you should be in your language learning journey by such and such time. Frustrations with yourself for not understanding something immediately. It's just a minefield for perfectionists. And honestly, it's no wonder that we end up quitting if we don't deal with these underlying negative beliefs that we have about ourselves. One of the main pain points for me was the recurring thought that I should be immersing. It was this intrusive thought at all times of day that I should be immersing. That's how I should be spending my time, regardless of whether I was in school, at work, enjoying my free time in other ways. I had this idea based on a system that did not have my humanity in mind, that if I wasn't spending the majority of my time immersing in my target language, I was doing something wrong with my time. And I internalized that as there was something wrong with me if for some reason I was not able to synthesize this idea into my life. In addition to this style of thinking just leading me to paralysis and not doing anything, it made me lose my agency as a person because I'm not the one in charge anymore if that's the recurring intrusive thought that's affecting my decisions. This system was very efficient at locking my all or nothing style brain into a prison of guilt and shame. If we're not actively honoring our individual selves and our individual humanity, we're left so susceptible to harmful comparisons that lead to shame, that lead to shitting on ourselves, that lead ultimately to quitting, which then leads to the thought of starting again, feeling just absolutely unbearable because there's this underlying storm of negative emotion underneath the whole thing. It is essential to address these underlying mean things that we say to ourselves, these harsh expectations we have of ourselves. Self-compassion was the foundation that freed me from this cycle once and for all. One of the first things that helped me on this self-talk, self-compassion journey was to stop visiting certain online language learning spaces that were making me feel bad, that were making me compare myself to others a lot. Any spaces that made me feel like I really needed to be a language learning robot and made me feel like I couldn't accept myself as I am at whatever pace without judgment. I just had to remove myself from those spaces. And once you realize that what your journey looks like has nothing to do with other people's journey, it's easier to start addressing habitual self-talk. I'm not really a Missy Elliott flip it and reverse it into pure positivity style gal. That doesn't work for me. It feels too cheesy. But what does work for me is, first of all, noticing when the negative self-talk is happening, catching myself doing it as I'm doing it. And that's honestly like 80% of the battle. But from there, I find it really helpful to interrogate the thought in order to neutralize it. So like, for example, if we're discussing that thought that I was having about immersing all the time, I could be like, okay, wait, is it even good for me to be immersing for 15 hours a day? Would that not lead me directly into burnout? Is it kind to expect that much from myself? Do I have other priorities and interests as well? Don't I also feel rejuvenated with quiet time too? Okay. This thought is not actually helpful or based on my reality. Changing your thinking is not going to happen overnight, but it's essential to start addressing it. No amount of productivity hacks stacked on top of a shaky mindset foundation are going to get you anywhere. We need to focus on creating sustainable language habits. A mindset of learning a language at any cost is not a sustainable mindset to have. If what you're doing requires you to go to extreme lengths to make it happen, it's not going to be sustainable in the long term. It's kind of like the pitfall of dieting, right? Where like maybe you can do a really restrictive diet for like a short term and you get these results or whatever, but then inevitably for the vast majority of people, that level of extremism or restriction is going to lead to rebellion. We don't need to cultivate more self-discipline or more grit, okay? We need self-compassion and we need engaging materials. If we meet ourselves where we are and start to create sustainable habits based on the reality of who we are, rather than creating habits or systems based on like an ideal version of yourself who isn't necessarily around all the time, we're going to actually be able to create a sustainable lifestyle of language learning. The mantra that I said to myself over and over again during my first year of not quitting anymore was consistency over intensity, okay? I knew that I had a problem with all or nothing thinking, and it would get me in trouble in a lot of different areas of my life. I had to keep reminding myself that I could approach things more sustainably. Intense spurts of activity inevitably led me to burnout. And once I burnt out, and then once I eventually did want to return to Japanese, I had such an all or nothing style idea of how I needed to be learning Japanese, how I should be learning Japanese, how much I should be doing. And then I had all these feelings of shame around like the time lost, that it made it impossible to start again. And that break that happened because of the burnout would turn into years. So the change I had to make was in showing myself that I could be consistent, because I didn't have any evidence to prove that to myself to this point. I had to show myself that I could approach language learning with sustainability in mind. At the beginning of your not quitting anymore journey, for lack of a better phrase, you have to build up that trust with yourself that you can be consistent, that you can do this. Showing up for any amount of time is a win. It is all about keeping your toes in the water. That is all that matters. You don't have to do hours every day. You don't. Maybe in the future that will come easily once your baseline proficiency is raised. Maybe you'll better know how to fit language learning into your life effectively. But the thing right now that you need to focus on is being consistent and recognizing and appreciating that consistency. It's an A+ if you show up at all. None of the oh, I showed up, but I could have done XYZ. No. Enough. Enough is enough. If you show up, you win. Not every day is going to look the same. Busyness and energy levels change. Our health has an impact on how much extra stuff we're able to do. Taking a break for a couple of days is fine, okay? This is not about pushing ourselves to the limit. Maybe you've tried that and you know that doesn't work well for you. It doesn't work well for me. It's fine to take a break, but try to find small, easy, fun things that you can do to keep your toes in the water. So then you can jump right back in and it's not going to feel daunting. If you miss a day or two, don't try to make up for lost time. Don't try to do triple the amount of stuff you would normally do to make up for it. Let go of any idea of time debt, okay? Because it's not serving you. It's only going to make getting back on the horse feel very intimidating. We're just trying to be easy breezy beautiful here. So now that you have a fundamental mindset shift in the works, what are a couple easy systematic changes that remind us to honor our humanity? Focusing on time spent. If you can, try to forget about the idea of progress, okay? Progress is not linear. Progress looks different for everybody. You don't know how long it's going to take you to understand XYZ or to remember this word. All you have to do is focus on showing up and finding things that you enjoy in your target language. If you're going to track anything at all, which can be helpful in providing yourself evidence that you could be consistent, I urge you to try tracking your time spent with your target language. Don't worry about words learned, don't worry about chapters, just track time spent with your target language. All of it is good. The more time you spend with your target language in whatever capacity makes the most sense for you, the more progress you're going to make. It's not going to happen overnight. You're not always going to see it. But no matter what, if time is being spent with your target language, you're going to get there. It all adds up. Use baby steps. Set a goal to read for 2 minutes, okay? Big goals off the jump lead to procrastination, but baby steps are highly attainable. It's almost harder not to do 2 minutes of something. And as we all know, it's often starting the activity that's harder than anything else. I am not here to tell you that 2 minutes of Duolingo every day is going to make you fluent. It's not realistic. But when you lean into embracing baby steps, you're not sacrificing progress. You're gaining steady momentum. Small wins push you forward when the big goal of becoming fluent feels very daunting. For this reason, you need to actively appreciate yourself and recognize yourself for showing up. Celebrate your small wins because this will pave the way for even more wins in the future. Checking in and experimenting. This is probably one of the more important parts of the process in terms of avoiding burnout. I highly recommend frequently checking in on yourself. You can do this by jotting down some weekly reflections, maybe get an accountability buddy who you chat with every week. Whatever it is, actually look at what you are doing, how you're feeling about it, and if you're feeling stuck, I urge you to break from the rigidity and try experimenting with something new. In my first year of not quitting, I spent a lot of time trying many things before settling into what worked for me. And what worked for me then doesn't work for me now. And what works for me now may not work for me a year from now. Use reckless experimentation as an opportunity to learn about yourself. Having to change your plan isn't a failure, it's an opportunity to refresh and rejuvenate your learning experience. It's valuable data. When you start to get an inkling that something isn't working for you, it is time to change the plan, okay? Don't wait to hopefully one day have more self-discipline for this to work. Stop the suffering and the self-blaming in its tracks. Meet yourself where you are. Come up with new things to try with your real human self in mind. Some things that you can ask yourself when you're checking in would be like, what's working about this approach? What's not working? Can I make this easier? Can I make this more fun? Can I make this more flexible? Okay, now I'll tell you the best activities that you can try experimenting with. I'm kidding. I am not going to tell you shit. If you're here, you already know all sorts of different things that you can do in your target language. You don't need me or anybody else to tell you the best resources or techniques to try. You just have to try them. I know it can be intimidating to jump in, especially if you're coming back after a long break, but I urge you to close your Reddit tabs about best resources, pick something, and just try it for 2 minutes. If it didn't work out well for you, that's some good data that you get to use tomorrow when you try something else out. No more self-torture allowed, okay? Language learning is a lifelong journey. It's not a goal to achieve. And we are humans, we are not robots. So let's start reminding ourselves that it's okay to be exactly as we are. Let's adjust our approaches to ourselves, not the other way around. No more beating ourselves up to the point of exhaustion. Let's stick around and see where it gets us this time. If you're ready to start a no more quitting your language learning journey, let me know in the comments. And I would love if you checked in a month or two. Let me know how it's going. If you liked this video, you might like some of my other videos about language learning things.